This is the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Jason. I am joined by my co-host, Lowell Francis. Hi, Lowell.
Hey, Jason.
And this is our monthly Gauntlet Hangouts Roundup episode. This month on the Roundup, we are delighted to be joined by the co-host of the brand new Asians Represent podcast, as well as a very, very active member of the Gauntlet community. That is Agatha Chang. Hi, Agatha.
Oh, hello.
Welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so we are going to talk about the games we played in August. We are also going to look ahead at the September calendar and highlight some of the cool games that are going on there for Gauntlet Hangouts. And then we're going to wrap up, as always, with Giving Me Life. Lowell, can you believe we're already done with August? It's crazy.
It's crazy. We were terrified for August and everything would come after Gen Con. And it's meant an insane month. So off Gauntlet, I did my Assassins of the Golden Age game. We wrapped our 30-plus session Blades in the Dark campaign. We started a home game of Hearts of Wulin. I wrapped a Veil campaign for the summer. I've done Changing the Lost PBTA. And I played a session of Googly Eyed Primetime Puppet Show, which Rich ran to close out the Gauntlet City Limits set of games. So it was very cool. And then for Gen Con, where I got to meet you in person and hang out with you and a number of other awesome people, including Agatha's co-host. I met Daniel very briefly at the
Who's delightful, by the way. Daniel Kwan is like a delight.
Oh, yeah. Super, super nice. And I ran Green Law of Varkith for Dungeon World and Last Days of Anglekites for Dungeon World and Masks and Urban Shadows there. I did 24 hours of games. I ran in 3 days.
I know. Yeah, you were the hero of the Magpie Room. You ran so many games.
It was great. And I walked away excited and I managed to make it through. Though for my Gauntlet games this month, I had to cancel a game due to illness. Band of Blades. It's the first time in a year and a half that I've had to cancel a Gauntlet game. So I was super irritated by that. And Agatha and the others were very nice about my having to cancel that at the last minute. But I also ran Tales from the Loop, and Worldwide Wrestling has continued on. And I actually want to talk about Tales from the Loop is the game I want to speak about today.
Awesome. Maybe give us just the premise. What's it about?
Yeah, so Tales from the Loop is one of this new series of kids on bikes games that take inspiration from Goonies and from Stand By Me and from Stranger Things heavily in recent years. And this particular one comes from the Swedish designers Free League Publishing. And this is a game set in an alternate 1980s. Essentially, the premise is that there's a town and there's this big particle accelerator loop that's been built around it. And that's creating strangeness. But it's also a world where there's a lot more robotics and anti-grav things. And yet phones are still the size of bricks. So it's this weird mix. It's built on the Mutant Year Zero engine, which I'll come back and talk about how they use that when I talk about what I dug about it. But more importantly, it's based on a series of art books and collections by Simon, I'm going to say this wrong, but Stalenhag, I want to say, who has done a lot of very strange kids in odd situations, odd sort of almost post-apocalyptic settings. And the game uses that artwork, but it's very different in tone from Stalenhag's original pieces, which are much darker. Rach Shelke has some very, very much has some thoughts on this. She's looked at the original art, and I think she's working on a blog post about that. Actually, the illustrations are going to be the backbone of an Amazon series for Tales from the Loop, I think based on the art more than on this game. For my version, because I am a child of the Midwest in the United States in the 1980s, I set it in the Midwest in the 1980s, as opposed to the settings that they have in the book, and really took all the places from around my local area to build an idea of a town that kids could get around and solve mysteries. And it is all about that. It is about a group of kids who are friends. They can be, I think, 11 to 15, I think is the age range. The older you are, the more stat points you have, but you have less luck. And so there's kind of a trade-off there. And this is a game that has taken a lot from PBTA. It's influenced by it.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Much like Mutant Year Zero, we have these kind of archetypes that are really playbooks. And it shows even more in this version because there are a few choices about skills, but they don't have anything like talents or abilities. So most of it is about, here are these relationships, and here's your character's feelings about things, and here are the people you know, and you have to make all these picks that kind of define the world there. What's your iconic item, the thing that you love, and all of that kind of stuff. And those character details are really good. You have to choose a pride. It's a thing that your character really loves about themselves, and you can call on that once per session to get an automatic success. You've got an anchor. An anchor is a person you go to, and that's actually how you heal, is you only have conditions that you take as damage, and in order to heal, you have to go and do a scene where you talk with your anchor and just interact with them. Every child has a problem, and that can be kind of very specific, like my brother stays up in his room and won't come out and talk to anybody. Or it can be, I have serious questions about my sexuality. So it has a lot of range to it.
Can I actually interrupt you there real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because when you said that, like, as an option of like, oh, my character is, confused about their sexuality or whatever, one of the things that occurs to me about these kids on bikes games and really in the culture as a general matter, this whole like nostalgia for like this imagined 80s or whatever, right?
Oh, yeah.
You see it in Stranger Things. You see it in all kinds of stuff, honestly. I'm curious, one of the criticisms is that the nostalgia tends to ignore like lots of real world issues and kind of like puts it kind of papers over some of the more problematic, stuff related to that time. I'm curious, like, does the book feel modern in that way? Or does it embrace this sort of like nostalgia, like in a sort of problematic way? That's what I'm asking.
It's very confused because one of the things is, and I'm going to come back to this, is it comes from a set of Swedish designers. And so one of the things you're getting about the particular nostalgia and the particular aesthetics are about Sweden in the 1980s.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Which has a different feel from American views on things. And I'll digress here for a second. I had Pavel in my game, and of course he's from Poland. And one of the things for him was that in terms of my presentation of the game, there was a lot about what school meant and what high school meant that he was like, I don't get it. I don't get this fascination. I don't get all this emotional stuff tied up with that. That wasn't like that for my childhood experience. So it doesn't lean into the full, I think, 1980s nostalgia that we see in Stranger Things. I think it skirts that a little bit. I think any of that we're going to be bringing in ourselves as a GM.
Yeah.
And it does have the things like the idea about being confused about sexuality or having actually some serious problems about alcoholism in your family that are there, that could be hard issues that you might want to deal with, depending on how the game goes. Like Patrick did decide that his character had that question about who they were as an issue, but it ended up being harder to get to the table just because of the premise. It was more difficult to kind of push into that, I think.
I played a game called Rememorex.
Mm-hmm.
That was something that was kickstarted successfully about a year or so ago. And I got a chance to play it with a big group of people at Dreamation. And I don't think this is a criticism of the actual game, but the session was gross as fuck. To the point where I left like an hour early because I couldn't deal with it. It was like if we weren't doing the tropes, we were doing it injustice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had to have like the blonde bimbo. We had to have like the black kid who talks like, with a jive accent, like all this other stuff. We had to have the whiz kid Asian. Like we had all this stuff, right? And I just remember thinking like, oh my God, like why can't we live in this sort of nostalgic space, but be a little bit more like, I don't know, like why do we have to be so married to it, right? Like, why can't we update it or freshen it up a little bit? So I'm always like super suspicious of these games as a result.
And I don't feel like Tales from the Loop leaned into that. I actually think it, at least in the games that I've run both at Origins and here, I don't think you necessarily have to buy into that. I think the characters are defined with enough sort of granularity of relationships and problems and issues that it kind of gets away from that.
This is pretty interesting to me as well, just because I didn't grow up either in this time or in this context. So, and like my parents and stuff, it's not like their nostalgia and my nostalgia along with that is not, it doesn't have to do with any of this. So I find this a very fascinating phenomenon, actually.
Well, and here's the thing that was sort of interesting is Sherry is about 4 years older than I am. And we both grew up in the 1980s in that's our middle school, high school period, but on kind of opposite ends. And so even in just that small time period, we have some very different takes on what was culturally important and what were the elements that were going on and what was valued. And I think that is the real challenge to Tales from the Loop, is that the book itself comes from a Swedish perspective, and then there's an American one that's set in Colorado, and they're so based in a very particular cultural experience in a very particular set of times in a very particular space that I don't think they translate well. I don't think they carry over well. And I think as a GM, it means that you have to do a lot of heavy lifting to make it the kind of game that you want to play, or that at least stands as touchstones for you.
So what is it? What are these cultural touchstones that is being referenced in these games? Is it the fact that you're a bunch of kids who your parents just tell you to go and play and then you ride bikes? Like, what is it?
Well, it's a little bit different in Tales from the Loop. So one of the things is that Tales from the Loop has this idea of that there is a mystery. And it says, it's kind of got a structural bit where it says, here's you're going to play. There's going to be a mystery. There are going to be troubles, and these are all capitalized mystery, capitalized troubles. And you're going to work through and solve that. And as importantly, you're going to do a home scene. Everybody's going to do a scene at home, and then you'll look at the mystery and do something with that. And then you'll do another home scene, and that there's this structure of moving back and forth that actually really works to kind of break it up so it doesn't feel like we're just doing an adventure game, that we're actually having to kind of balance obligations of home life and so on. And I think that's one of the things that the game does well. And I think the touchstones are that you're pretty young, you're a group of friends, and you're joined together in friends. There's a certain mobility that you have. The game actually sets out some specific premises. One is that the world is fantastic, that you've got all these weird things going on. But it's also, this is on the list of 6 things. Like number 3 is it's also incredibly mundane. The world is also boring and awful, and you have to do homework, and your parents don't listen to you, and you have to do these things, and that the game kind of moves between those. And number 4 is that adults are there, but they're not much help. They're not going to pay attention to you. For whatever reason, they're not going to be the solution to your problems. You have to figure it out yourself. And even if you go to them and talk to them, they're going to misread you. Something is going to happen there on that. But then another thing it has as a principle is that the kids can't die. It says bad things will happen. Your parents may get divorced. You may get hurt, but you can't die in the game. That's absolutely off the table, which I think is an interesting thing, given that some of the more recent stuff has had a more kind of scary, lethal tone to it.
I think it's still fairly on genre, though, because, this is kind of also gets to what Agatha was asking. To answer your question as far as like pop culture touchstones, the movie E.T. is a big one. The many movies from the 80s, like Goonies and Stand By Me, like there are lots of like movies that are kind of about these kids, right, in the 80s, and they're on their bikes, and there's usually a mystery or some supernatural thing, right? Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a little bit. But I think that's still fairly on genre because like those kids never died.
But I would say that even like It and those kinds of things.
Yeah, It is a good one. Yeah.
It's a group of friends that come together. They're usually misfits. They maybe shouldn't be friends, but they are, and they have a lot of independence. That they're able to ride around without any parental supervision. They're able to go places that today, that's how parents would get arrested. And I think it's this sort of nostalgia for that freedom.
Well, so as far as this game goes, what are some of the, criticisms, or what were you less sure about as far as Tales from the Loop goes?
So one of the things is that it does take the Mutant Year Zero rules, which are very simple dice pool D6 rules, and it does a nice job of streamlining them, which is good. I like it. It's pretty easy to do. However, it's one of those stat plus dice games, which is fine because in this game, it's a set stat to a set skill. so you don't have to do all the kind of cross-referencing things. But some of the skill lists have some overlap, like there's like compute and tinker and calculate, and some of the skills, they want to have the right number of skills. They want to have 12 skills. And so as a result, they've got skills that have weird overlap on them, which I think is a problem. Another thing is that the central setting material in the book is the Swedish setting. They have a Colorado-based setting that's in there, but more attention is paid to the Swedish one, which is fine, and it's very cool. And it is a taste for me of what it must be like for people in foreign cultures having to get American cities and places as the default, because it's tough. Because there's a lot of things referenced there and a lot of ideas that are there that even when they look like, okay, it's Helma's Gudesdotter in the Swedish, parentheses, it's, Dana Andrews in the English name, for the NPCs. But there's still a lot of cultural bits that they have there that they haven't quite translated over that I have to picture. And it's not even like a European thing from the 80s, because the Swedish experience, the Nordic experience, is very different from mainland Europe and Italy and Spain and the Eastern Bloc and so on. So it's even a more narrow niche. I built my own setting because I wanted to work past that. There are two other things that struck me having run this quite a bit. One is, of course, they've got an adventure book. I backed the Kickstarter. I have the adventures book. And the adventures really have a weird tone to them. Like, they don't fit with the tone of the premise. Like, one is about the Stepford wives' parents, and like they're kidnapping women and they're like brainwashing them. And some of the other ones are like, there's a killer, like a serial killer. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not what I want as my tone in this. That's more like it than it is like what I want. And as a result, I don't think there's a real coherency to the modules and to the story seeds that they had. So I've had to rework those. I think if somebody's going in hoping for there being a lot of out of the box stuff that they could use to run from, that may not be what you will find. Related to that, they've got all this stuff about, okay, we've got these robots. The robots are around, and there's all these like grav transports and things like that, and all of that stuff. It's very easy for just to leave those off to the side.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah, like, does that feel really integral or what?
It feels a little tacked on to me. And in fact, I only kind of had a robot in the last of the 3 sessions just because I wanted to have a robot on the table, because it hadn't been an issue before that. So that's kind of weird. The other thing that I noticed, and this struck me both when I ran it as a one-shot at conventions and then here online, is there are, I think, like 9 or 10 playbooks, and like there's the Bookworm and the Computer Geek and the Weirdo and the Rocker and the Hick and the Jock. But one of the archetypes is a troublemaker. And the troublemaker is not necessarily a bully, but they're the ones that kind of start fires or mouth off to teachers and things like that. And it's an evocative archetype. But it's also the archetype that if someone takes it, they are going to drive things. Everything kind of has to respond to them, because the other kids are kind of playing along and having to do things, and we've got this one character who's kicking at things.
It's the chaotic neutral one, basically.
Yeah, it's a chaotic neutral one in a party of lawful, or at least, neutral good characters. And
right.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it was really obvious to me because the person who played the troublemaker wasn't there for session 1. And so the 3 players had kind of built up this kind of, hey, we're friends and we're going along. We're going to solve this mystery. And then when we got to session 2, the troublemaker, who we retroed in that they was part of the group, but then they're much more aggressive and pushing at things, and much more aggressive with the other characters even, like Sherry's playing a girl, and, I don't believe girls should be doing things, which is, as Sherry put it, that's my experience in the 1980s, but it changed the tone, and it meant that the other players had to kind of react to that. And like Stephen Desjardins, who I love, played a troublemaker and did a brilliant job with it at Origins for one of the sessions. and was good and sharing. But again, his course then kind of drove where we were going.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if I were going to run this long term, I might actually take that archetype out.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah, but I think it's something that never occurred to me until we got to playing it a couple times. It was only in play that I saw that. Have you hit other games where like a particular playbook or something like changes drastically the complexion of the group?
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Like
The Chosen in either Monster of the Week or Monsterhearts.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Yeah. I get the smile when I said that because you know what I'm talking about.
Kate's favorite playbook that is no longer there for Monsterhearts 2.
And I celebrate it to her dissatisfaction very often.
Well, what does that do?
The thing about The Chosen is that they usually have like some kind of fated mission or something, right, that they're doing. And they end up just being kind of like the center of the story. They become like the lead protagonist. That's always been my kind of issue with them. What do you think, Agatha?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I played The Chosen once in a Monster of the Week game, and I didn't push for it very hard, and my character was very flat. I don't know if that was because I wasn't that familiar with RPGs back then, or just the fact that you need to do that with your character because that's kind of the be-all, end-all.
That's what The Chosen does.
Yeah, and and everything just becomes revolving around them or else they have nothing to do. So it's almost like as the GM, you have to provide for them.
Yeah, you're right. So it is the bits that they have to play off of.
Yeah. I mean, like in both playbooks for both games, The Chosen has like there's a bunch of like GM support like in the playbooks of like stuff the GM has to do, right? So I always nix them. I don't allow them in my games.
Okay.
Well, so let's wrap up Tales from the Loop then real quick. So overall takeaway?
Overall takeaway is I think it's got a great premise. I think it's got a great idea. I think the actual physical form of the book is beautiful, but I think if somebody is interested in this, I'd just buy the PDF. Because I think about 10 to 20% of that you can pull out and make a really viable game out of it. You don't need that much more. You can do it very minimally, and it will provide delightful fun. I don't think you have to invest in buying the whole big hardback or the supplementary materials or the GM screen, for God's sake. But I think there's some great stuff there. I really do like it. I'm going to run it again. It has one of my favorite things is that every player has to pick the favorite song for their character. And that is a thing that will stop people and make them go, ooh. I have a list of songs from the era, and I get them to explain why it is. So there's lots of little bits I love, but I think it's a slice out of it rather than the whole game.
Cool. Agatha, how was your August? What'd you play?
Oh, I was looking at my calendar and I realized I actually played a lot more than I thought. So I play off Gauntlet. I'm running Masks, the anime version of it, which is going really well, and I think I'm going to put it on Gauntlet at some point.
Nice.
I also I facilitated Microscope with Matt, actually, from Gauntlet as well. I don't know how to say his last name. Matt Dowdy?
Matt Dowdy, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, which was good. I really like Microscope as a 2-person game.
I love it.
Yeah. And then on Gauntlet, I'm playing, Jason, your long playtest of The Between, which is still as sexy and fun as ever.
Thank you. It's very good.
Yeah, also 1%er, Hounds of the Moon, Santa Juanita Chapter, which is the longest name ever. Thanks, Jason. I also played Remember Tomorrow, Band of Blades, so lol, your game, Dialect, and Don't Rest Your Head, which is what I want to talk about. I think this Don't Rest Your Head came out a while ago, right?
About
I think
100 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
No, it's been a long time. It's one of the like old granddaddy story games, right? It's been around for a while.
Yeah, it's been around longer than I've been playing tabletop games.
Same, yeah. Well, it came out when I was on my break, so yeah, it predates me, modern Jason for sure.
Yeah, it came out I think in 2007, and I feel like the mechanics really held up regardless of how long it's been around for. So the setting is that you play insomniacs who, because you've been unable to sleep for a while, you become awake. And when you're awake, you gain some kind of superpower that associates with that. And also you become irrevocably involved with this space, this alternate universe called the Mad City. And yeah, that's the premise. It's got a rotating cast of characters, and it basically uses 3 pools of dice. One is discipline, one is exhaustion, one is madness. So you roll them depending on what you want to do, and you want to get like even numbers as a result, and so on and so forth. So the mechanics is fine. I feel like what is so intriguing about this game is not so much, I don't know, what you're doing in terms of the way that the mechanics are like driving the game or whatever. It's more the setting is what is the most intriguing. The art is amazing. It's very moody. It's kind of got that emo vibe. The writing is really beautiful as well. Like the descriptions of the kind of madness talents you can have. So madness is the kind of really crazy supernatural stuff you can get. And then there's like exhaustion as well, which is more like you're normal. You're just like very good at it as a normal person. What I like is that the mechanics, they really do drive home this sense of desperation. Like you're always getting pushed into a corner, because every single time you roll, if you get a higher amount or you get more hits in certain pools, then they trigger certain results. And then once the results build up, then you crash at some point, and then everything goes badly in game. And this is kind of like, it's ultimately driving you towards a point where you either go mad or you just go mad. I think that's really the only option. Depending on how long you play, I think is how much more you'll feel that sense of desperation. So I think the mechanics really pull that off, because you can see that in your rolls, and then there's like tick marks and stuff that show like, oh, okay, you're getting closer. And I guess the onus in some ways is on the GM. So they have to put you in situations where you feel like you have to use more dice because you need to succeed, or else if the pressure's not on, it doesn't really work. And I remember playing a one-shot of this before where I wasn't pushed very hard and none of us were. So it was kind of just like maybe we just won't use anything. And then we just kind of like skated through this crazy city, well, the Mad City. And it felt very touristy. And I think that's where you're like, okay, like the GM needs to like push the players. But, it's good. The game that we played was set in London, and it's run by Paul Spraggett.
Paul Spraggett, yeah.
Yeah, I'm struggling so much with these last names. Yeah, it's run by Paul Spraggett, and he's really good.
He's good. Yeah. He's really good.
Yeah,
I know.
And he is so good at. I told him this, and it's definitely 100% a compliment. He is so good at playing assholes.
He is. He really is. No one plays a prick like Paul does. Like, yeah, but like a really charismatic way,
Different kinds of assholes too, where you're just like, whoa, I know this guy. I know that guy too. It's amazing. It's one of the most realistic interactions I've seen and experienced like in RPGs. And this is what actually is, this game has stayed with me through, especially the second session. There are 3 sessions, and after the second session, I can't get over that experience. So the game that we're playing is set in London. I don't know a lot about London, but there's the character that I'm playing is his name is Ibrahim, and he's like a recent immigrant from Egypt. And when I was setting up my character, I remember telling Paul that the themes that I had in mind were emasculation, humiliation, and dignity as a part of like the immigrant man's experience.
Interesting.
And it's kind of, it's inspired by several novels that I've been reading by Ravi Haj, who's this Lebanese Canadian novelist. And they all have kind of the same themes, where it's like, it's about, trying to deal with PTSD, and also like, what does it mean to be a man when you like move to a new place where most likely your wife is the one who's going to get a job, and you're not the breadwinner, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so I was like, yeah, that's what I want my theme to be. And Paul was like, okay. And it was so, every single interaction it was with my character was like, he's like trying to get a job. He's maybe getting a job at this like rundown local cinema. And it's just like, there's so much racism thrown in his face, and there's so much pressure from his family, from his wife, who's like super overworked, and also just a lot of microaggressions in general. And I really enjoyed it.
I love it. I'm loving it as you're describing it. It sounds so good.
It was so sad. It's so funny because when we were playing it, every single time it was my scene, it's always, we started calling it the sad immigrant man experience, while everyone else is having these like crazy, like, whoa, these dudes with like pins in their faces. And mine is just like sad. Like, I can't get a job. And my daughter is like, well, not being rebellious, but, you know, having like issues. And it was just so real in a way that I really wanted out of this game. And that's one thing that I find very interesting, because a lot of times we're talking about like being at the table and like how do you go about being respectful of different cultures, different backgrounds? Like, how do you not appropriate things, and how do you not fall into stereotypes?
Okay.
And I think, because nowadays the people that I play with are generally very great people who are also just socially aware. They don't fall into a lot of racial stereotypes, but it's hard, I think, for people to know, if you say, I want to explore what it means to be like any kind of minority. I want to explore how this person should navigate the world. It's hard for other people to provide that. So it's hard for people, you know, like when you say, yeah, like, I'm sure in this context, this person will be on the receiving end of a lot of racism. We as players, and or even as a GM, you're not necessarily comfortable with being racist because you don't know what is going too far, yeah, or what other people are comfortable with, or you're just not comfortable with it in general, like in yourself. And that's not something that you want to present. But I find it so fascinating to be able to actually explore it. And I don't know. What do y'all think? I'm definitely a racial minority. So I'm comfortable with it, but
this month I played a special series of Monsterhearts called True Beauty, which is based off of it's set in the 1980s ball culture or ball scene, right? Which is mostly young people of color, mostly Black people, who kind of form up in these houses for both camaraderie and financial support. And then they go on the weekends, they go to these like little gatherings where they walk a ball, which is kind of like, they kind of get in drag, or they walk in different categories, they dance, that kind of thing. And you're kind of judged, for different categories and stuff. And to the best of my knowledge, every player and myself, we're all queer, and I'm half Latino, but none of us are Black, right? And so we were definitely like, and all the characters were Black. So like we were, it was something that was in the back of my mind, right? Like I don't want to do a disservice here, but I think what we basically settled on, and I think the way to handle it is you just kind of play them like you would play any other character, right? I mean, we would deal with, we do have this one character who is kind of racist in that kind of like in that Get Out way, like I'm a really, really like sympathetic white person, right? But who like kind of lazily or clumsily like tries to integrate themselves into Black culture, right? Like that kind of thing. And in other games, I've had NPCs who are like quite racist, and it is uncomfortable, right? Like it's uncomfortable to play a character like that, right? I in Mercy Falls, for example, I have an otherwise very, very fascinating and entertaining NPC who always calls our Korean player character, always says that she's Chinese, not Korean, right? And she makes like, kind of commentary like that shows her ignorance, right? And whenever I do that, like I feel like personally kind of like, but it also kind of gives like the player of that character a chance to sort of like, to push back, to kind of like own the situation a little bit, right? And so, yeah, it's complicated, but I don't think you should shy away from it. That's my feeling on it.
Sherry has always said to me that for her to hit against those issues and things, it is really about having trust of the GM, and that from the player perspective, that's a hard thing sometimes to get, and to be willing to ask for those things to happen.
I would never do it with non-gauntleteers.
I would never do this. And even sometimes, you want to play with them a few times before you're willing to say, "Hey, I want to deal with these kinds of of issues to know what the bounds are. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think one thing that is very valuable, and I don't know if this is veering from our topics, but I do think that one thing that's very valuable about playing out some of these microaggressions at the table, if everyone has agreed to it and is comfortable enough with it, is that it's very empowering, actually. Because when you're playing at the table, it's still a fantasy, right? It's not actual real life. You're not actually facing the real life repercussions. So you have the space to react in a way that you probably wouldn't in real life, and to maybe get a result that you've always kind of dreamed of, or you imagine that this character might have dreamed of. And it's very freeing to see that possibly play out the way that you've always wanted it to. So I think that's one thing that maybe people don't know, is that this is why people ask for it. It's not because, like, I want people to be racist at me. I have enough of that in real life. It's okay. It's more like I want to know what it's like if I can speak up, or if I have the power to use my insomniac powers to really, like, diffuse the situation in a way that I wouldn't be able to in real life, and or to fight back. So that's what was really great about this game. It has nothing really to do with the actual premise, but it was just, it really stuck with me. It was just so beautiful in so many ways. And there was a scene where we're all living in these like tenement buildings, and then our neighbors throwing this crazy party. So it's a common thing, and it's just like pounding through our walls. And my character's wife is like, gotta wake up at 5 a.m. the next day, and is just asking my character to go and tell him to turn down the volume. And what my character did was, like, he was like, yes, I'll do it, of course. And he leaves the house, and he just starts wandering through the streets of London. Because he can't face either of them. He can't face the party. He can't face his wife. And it's just, I was like, oh, this is so sad, but I love it so much.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. And I think you both hit on it, in that it's the best thing is establishing boundaries and expectations before a game. And I told Paul that I really appreciated what he was doing with the characters, and he said, yeah, I really went for it because I know that if you're not comfortable with it, you would X-card me. So those are my thoughts about Don't Rest Your Head, but specifically my game of Don't Rest Your Head.
Yeah, no.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to say about Don't Rest Your Head, Agatha?
Nope. That's it.
Awesome. Well, I got a chance to play Off Gauntlet. I played Tech Noir at Games on Demand at Gen Con. I also ran Velvet Glove in the Magpie Room at Gen Con. On Gauntlet, I played 1%er Hounds of the Moon Santa Juanita chapter. I did the long play test of The Between, which is going well, and Agatha's in both of those games, 1%er and the long play test. Monster Hearts 2, True Beauty, which I just mentioned. Midnight at the Oasis, which is Cat Raman's excellent game about cross-dressers in the 90s. Cheat Your Own Adventure Confidential, which was a trio of noir-themed Cheat Your Own Adventure sessions. Veil 2020, the Arasaka Brainworm. Veil 2020 is butter, by the way. I love that system. It's so good. Cheat Your Own Adventure Variety Pack 1 and 2. And The Election of the Wine Queen, which is what I'm going to talk about.
Wow, that is a huge list for you this month,
Huge
Jason.
month for me, yeah. I normally only have like 4 things. So I had like a bunch of stuff this month. The Election of the Wine Queen is a German LARP that was translated to English by Garrett Reininghaus, our own Garrett Reininghaus, and adapted for online play. It's about the Wine Queen election. Hold that thought. You should see my co-host's faces here.
Okay.
It's about the Wine Queen election being held one year in the German town of Himpeldorf. So this is something that Garrett had to explain to us because we don't have something like this in the States, right? But essentially these wine queens, what they are is it's almost like a beauty queen thing. Every region or town that produces wine has this contest to elect a wine queen. And it's kind of like a beauty pageant where they have to get up there and answer some questions and demonstrate their knowledge of wine and how to describe wine. And then they travel around to like conventions, like all across Europe or whatever, or I guess in Germany, maybe other parts of Europe. But they travel to conventions and they talk about wine, the wine they represent, right? I was trying to think of like, what is the equivalent in the States? And all I could come up with is some like rural communities have these like little pageants, for their local crop or whatever, right? Like whatever they're locally known for. So for example, I went to one once where they were electing the cotton queen, and it was really strange, if I'm being honest, because the cotton queen, like, she's wearing this beautiful gown and this crown, and they wheeled out a bale of cotton, and then they did a wedding ceremony where she had to marry the cotton. It was really strange.
Oh,
yeah.
Children of the cotton. Okay.
Yeah, it was strange.
I don't think there's anything like this in Canada, but then again, I haven't been to rural parts of Canada either, so maybe we have it too.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's not like a super common thing over here, to be clear. So anyway, so this game, though, is about, you play these 5 characters who are all from this town of Himbeldorf, and they all have like a history with each other. They have a lot of drama between each other. 3 of them are contestants, and then one is like the MC of the show, and the other is the head of the jury. And there's, a lot of drama that plays out between them. It's a little creepy because like, there's a lot of like, the jury head is an older man, and the MC is a woman who's trying to save her business, and she really needs her daughter to win the wine queen election because it'll help her winery business. And so she's going to arrange for her much younger daughter to hook up with this older guy so that she can win. And like, there's just like all this like kind of stuff, right? It's like high drama stuff. But the cool thing about the game is you have these really like intense little dramatic scenes, and they do get pretty intense. But then anybody at any time can interrupt the scene by playing this drinking song called Ein Prosit. And so you play the music, and everyone has to stop the scene and loudly sing this song, Ein Prosit, right? And it's like this loud, boisterous, like, da, 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 right, thing. And it's pretty genius because like right as the scene is getting super intense, super like just high drama and like uncomfortable, I'm prosit, right? And so yeah, it disrupts it in almost a violent way, right? And so it's an interesting feeling. It's an interesting experience. That's basically the game. At the end, you decide who the wine queen's going to be and all that stuff. The thing I really want to talk about is the way Garrett has set this up. So Garrett, the last, I would say for about a year, he's been working on this initiative that he calls LOG or LAOG, I suppose. It's an acronym, LAOG, that stands for Live Action Online Game. And what he's doing is super fascinating. So LARPs, as a general matter, are kind of inaccessible in a lot of ways. They are inherently difficult to play in a casual way because you have to be present. You have to have a space to play. It's called live action, right? Like, and so as a result, you usually only get to play LARPs at conventions, and even then only conventions where there's kind of like a LARP scene, right? And when I say LARP here, I'm talking about like freeform and Nordic LARP, not so much the sword, the foam sword buffer LARP, right? So anyway, LARPs can be kind of difficult to play. And one of the things that's really neat about Garrett's live action online games thing is he's taking pre-existing LARPs, like the election of the Wine Queen, but he's done a bunch now, and he's adapting them for online play. He's creating like these new ways to interact with them, new ways of making online play space, like mimic LARP play space. And it's super, super fascinating and good. So in this particular election of the Wine Queen thing, one of the things he did to help like the online play aspect is he created like an act structure. Now, normally the game doesn't have this. It doesn't have this act structure where in each act you're going to be, what scenes are coming up, but he did that for the online version. And I think the reason why he did it is because we don't have the space in an online context to just sort of wander about and do our story, right? Like you would in a LARP space. And so what he did instead is he created these acts, and within each act, there's all these like defined scenes of like who's going to be in the scene. And so I think like creating that structure helped. It kind of put a bit of a frame on things that you wouldn't have in the face-to-face LARP version. It was a little bit more structured, more like a tabletop role-playing game. but it wasn't so heavy-handed that you couldn't stay behind your character's eyes the whole time, right? And so it was super effective in that sense. Like whenever we were playing, we never broke character, right? And I thought that was super impressive. And the reason why we never broke character is because we had this like, you know, we knew beforehand like who was going to be in each scene and what the scene was going to be about. And so as soon as it switched to you, you just did it and you never broke character. You stayed in character the whole time. It was super effective. Another thing he did is he's developed this thing that he calls the digital black box. And so black box is a term that I'm probably going to get it slightly wrong because I'm not super deep in the LARP scene, but it's a LARP term for like essentially a room that has no furniture, and it's kind of like a blackened room, right? Like all the walls and floor are black and there's no furniture. It's just you in the room. And so you use light and your body to kind of tell the story, right? And it's usually used, my understanding at least, is it's usually used for like a confessional type play. Like you go into the black box and you have like a confessional, right? Like where you say something that your character's thinking or whatever, right? And so that's an element of this game. And the way Garrett does it is to create the digital black box. If you are not in the scene, you must have your camera and your mic off. And it's a simple thing, but it's surprisingly effective. Like when you're the only person in the scene, maybe doing like a confessional, or maybe it's just you and one other person, that space that's created by everybody else going off camera and off mic, it's surprisingly intimate. Like it's surprisingly effective at like sort of creating space.
Wow, that sounds really cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was neat. I mean, it was easy to get into. It was an easy thing to kind of like get used to, like, cause you knew, okay, my scene's coming up. I'm not in the scene. I'm going to go off. I go off mic and I just listen. Right. And I go off camera, except whenever the Unprosit song plays, in which case everyone turns their camera on, everyone turns their mic on, you sing loudly, right? You kind of disrupt it. It was just little things like that. Garrett has really given a lot of thought to how can we do some of these LARPs online. And I think it's super great because honestly, these are things that we definitely wouldn't play otherwise, right? Because we're strictly an online community, right? And I think it's also an opportunity for people who may not have a chance to experience some of these LARPs to do it. You know, I've played some really good ones at conventions. For example, one of my favorites is Black Sunday 1935. And that's a sort of like Kansas. It's like a carnival's rolled into town, but they're trapped in a basement with a bunch of like holy rollers and like it's this big group of people who have to kind of learn how to get along or whatever. And it was super fascinating, but it would be impossible to do online. But I can suddenly envision a scenario where you could adapt it to where you could get a lot of the same themes and a lot of the same type of play, but in an online context. You know, it's not going to be as good as the face-to-face. Obviously, you're going to miss a big part of the LARP experience of like being present and moving around. But, you know, staying in character the whole time is an enjoyable experience. You can do that online. Feeling like you're in a sort of intimate space is something you can replicate online. You know, it's easy to feel isolated. Like if you're just sitting in your room and you can't hear or see anyone else and you're just talking into a mic, like you can do things to help recreate some of these sensations and feelings. And I'm just super impressed overall with this initiative that Garrett's been taking up.
Wow.
Do you guys have any LARP experience? You guys do LARPs?
No, I'm super uptight. And so whenever I go to cards and I'm always like, oh, maybe I should do that. Nope, I'm going to sit here with my dice. Thank you very much.
Agatha, do you LARP?
I haven't had a lot of opportunities to, but I played Emily Care-Boss's LARP, from the Romance Trilogy. Yeah, I played the Arthurian Legend version of it. And to be honest, I think I'm probably not very comfortable with LARPs yet because it's very hard for me, because that one specifically is a very dramatic one. And it was a little hard for me to get into that space. Maybe it's also because you're playing with strangers. I don't know. So maybe it was the con setting. So I feel like I didn't give it enough gravitas considering, but it's pretty cool. It's especially cool trying to learn all the like different safety tools that are associated with it.
Right.
That they teach you. I really enjoy that.
Yeah. I've only played maybe in my lifetime, maybe like a dozen LARPs or so, if even that. And I've always enjoyed it a lot. In many ways, it's a similar experience to playing a story game, but in a lot of ways, it's really, really different. And it's almost always been enjoyable. You know, the thing about it is, you know, the LARP scene, the Nordic LARP scene, the freeform scene, it has this, I've always thought it has this like air of exclusivity about it, right? Like it has a bit of like academia, has some kind of like academia undertones to it, which I don't love. And it's very white. It's a very, very white space, right? Which is like another thing. So I've always been kind of like suspicious of it, right? But whenever I've played, I've always had a really good time. And it's always felt like a really, really, it's felt like a more intense and intimate experience than you can get with a lot of tabletop role playing games, because because it is kind of just improv in a lot of ways, right? Like you're just kind of, you really have to live behind a character's eyes. And that's different for me just as a general matter, because the way I play tabletop games is I don't really play that way. I like, as you know, Agatha, from playing The Between with me, I like for the players and GM both to be constantly jumping back and forth from their, talking about the setting and then going back to their characters and then going back to the setting. I like to bounce around, that kind of writer's room approach. And so LARPs kind of force you to be in this, like living behind my character's eyes kind of space, right? And I think there's a lot of value in that. And what I loved about this Election of the Wine Queen game was, and kind of getting to a little bit of what you were saying there a second ago, Agatha, with the exception of one player, but even that player I knew pretty well from our online spaces, I had played with the other players a lot. I was really familiar with them. And so it was nice to be able to play this LARP with Gauntleteers, right? Like with people who I know and trust, particularly Lauren and Garrett. And, Lauren and I, we played like characters they were like older men who in their youth used to be kind of like romantic with each other, but they had kind of like grown apart. And we just had like so many good scenes of us rekindling our romance, and it was really personal and it felt really authentic. And I think the sort of LARP, the construct of the LARP is what made it feel really good, right? I think if it was a tabletop game where we were going to dice and stuff, I think we wouldn't have been able to hit this very intimate kind of like authentic kind of experience that Lauren and I kind of gave each other, And I also think that the fact that it was Lauren was very helpful, because I play with Lauren a lot and I trust Lauren, and that's not something I've ever done at a con LARP, right? Like that really, really high level of trust and intimacy is not something I've always achieved. And so I like that Garrett is giving the Gauntlet a chance to try some of these games out. And I think that's all I want to say about it. Let's go take a look at September. Okay, let's take a look at the September Gauntlet Hangouts calendar, and each, I just looked at our choices.
Oh yeah, I just looked at that.
Let's each highlight a game we are excited about. This is not necessarily a game that we're in, just something we think is cool. Lowell, what do you think?
So we're really lucky that Patrick Knowles has finally broken down and decided to GM for us. And this last month he's been running Monsterhearts, Once Again We Return, which is based on The Wicked and Divine, and people are gaga for it. And he's doing more sessions of that in September. And the people are effusive, and Patrick has walked away feeling good about the games. And I'm just so glad that he's running for us, and he's running such an interesting hack that he's come up with.
Awesome. Agatha, what's your pick?
So, I also picked Monsterhearts. This is Monsterhearts 2 The Summer Folks, which is run by Paul Spraggett again. I have been so hyped for this game. I am personally in it, and I've been making a summer playlist. I'm ready to get sad with summer.
Nice.
Awesome. My choice is also Monsterhearts 2. I'm choosing Monsterhearts 2 Kingsport 1692. This is run by Kat Rahman, and this is an extension, I believe, of her Kingsport setting from Monsterhearts. So Kat's been running this series of Monsterhearts, but like with a Lovecraftian vibe, right? And so she did Kingsport 76, and I heard nothing but good stuff about that. And now it's being continued with Kingsport 1692. I'm loving this because it's big time echoes what I did with Mercy Falls, right? Like, which is like creating this like campaign structure within Gauntlet Hangouts, which is, I think Mercy Falls was one of the first things that did that, right? And so it's exciting to see people doing that kind of stuff now, and Kat's amazing. So yeah, great game. I think it's going to be great. Let's go to Giving Me Life. Hi listeners, I have 3 things to tell you about this month. The first is that Codex Asphalt is now available in our $4 Patreon feed. This is our biggest issue ever. It features Pack of Strays Wolf Run, a card-based game inspired by Fall of Magic set in the Pack of Strays universe, Wheels on the Road, an original post-apocalyptic Forged in the Dark game, and much more. The second thing I want to tell you about is GauntletCon 2018. GauntletCon 2018 will be held from October 18th through the 21st. The full schedule of over 200 games is available, and Gauntlet Patreon supporters can register for those games right now. The last thing I want to tell you about is the Codex Volume 1 Kickstarter. Yes, that's right, the Gauntlet will be launching its very first Kickstarter campaign on October 2nd. The campaign will be to fund a beautiful hardcover book collecting the first 13 issues of Codex. We want to go all out to make this book as gorgeous as possible, to make it the ultimate Gauntlet collector's item, but we will definitely need your help to do so. Also, we'll be making a limited number of these books available at a deep discount for our Patreon supporters, so be sure to keep your eyes open for this campaign when it launches October 2nd. For more information on everything we do in the Gauntlet, go to gauntlet-rpg.com. Thanks. It's giving me life. Lol, what's giving you life?
So when I ran Dungeon World, I had a giant stone golem crustacean, which was my rock lobster joke, which was a B-52 song joke. And then Rich directed me to this podcast called Hit Parade. It's by a guy who writes music columns for Slate. And essentially he looks at a particular, day in the Billboard charts and examines the context of it. Like I was just listening to one the other day about Donna Summer and all of Donna Summer's hits. And then he was looking at the parallels between Tom Petty and Prince and their hit records and how their careers went, and the B-52s and how they came out of Athens, Georgia, along with REM. And he had a great episode on Miley Cyrus. And wow. This is a great podcast. I love music, and I love hearing the kind of behind the scenes craft and looking at why certain songs made it and others didn't. And it's a great podcast. It's just really worth listening to.
Awesome.
Is it a part of the Slate podcast?
I don't think it's on the Slate network. It's on a different network, but I know it's the columnist from Slate. I think if you look up Hit Parade, it's on a different one, but I can't remember what it's called.
I'm surprised by that because Slate has 900 podcasts.
It might be on the network. I don't know. When they get to the credits, I will admit that that's the point at which I'm going on to the next episode because I'm binging.
Fair enough.
Agatha, what's giving you life?
It is The Legend of Fuyao.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've been hyping all these Chinese dramas because I need more people to watch them so we can hype over it together. The Legend of Fuyao is about this. I would describe it as Harry Potter meets Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because it really is pretty Harry Potter-esque, at least in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's pretty cheesy the way that all of these Chinese dramas are, and it's also more specifically aimed at a female audience, so I think they have a lot of cheesy romance scenes, which I'm about. And I like the protagonist. She's spunky. I like the costumes. They're gorgeous. I like the fighting. They're sometimes a little flowery, but a lot of times you can see the oomph of the punches, and that's what I enjoy. There's always politicking, like almost every single Chinese drama, which I enjoy. And it's just really fun. It's a breeze to watch through.
And she's like a character that would be played by a guy. It would be a guy's character 10 years ago. So it's so cool to see her do that stuff.
Yeah. Finally.
Awesome. The thing giving me life is Okami HD on the Nintendo Switch. Okami is a game that came out originally on the PS2, and this is just a HD version of it that's on Switch. Let me tell you about Okami. I'm not going to go about Okami. It's 100 years old, so I'm not going to talk about what it is. But I'm going to say this. If you ever need a strong argument for the power of art direction, Okami is it. This game is old. It was on PS2, but on the Switch, it's gorgeous. It still looks so good. It still looks so fresh and so exciting and modern. And it's a testament to art direction. It really is. You see this a lot in Nintendo games too, right? A lot of Nintendo, first party games are often direct, they're underpowered or whatever, right? Cause it's Nintendo, but they always look really good. They usually look comparably good to PS4 stuff or whatever, because art direction is so strong. And, this is just another example of that. It's a Capcom game, but yeah, it's still, after all these years, Okami just looks, It looks sharp. It looks great on the Switch. So it's really fun too. Gameplay holds up nicely. Hey, before we go, Agatha, tell us a little bit about Asians Represent. What's it all about?
Yeah. So Asians Represent is a new podcast that I'm co-hosting with Daniel Kwan on the One Shot Network. So we are basically looking at all of the games with Asian themes in them. So this Asian doesn't mean just East Asia. It means all of Asia, so South Asia, and then also what can sometimes be considered the Middle East. It's sometimes we call it West Asia. And we're looking at all these things. We're exploring what it means to have good representation, creative representation, bad representation. And we're also, it's a space for us to celebrate all of the Asian creators within the analog gaming community. So we have a lot of guests lined up and we're super excited to interview them.
Awesome. Cool.
That's
Sounds great.
I saw that Daniel got the new L5R quick start set, and I'm very, very excited to hear him talk about that in the future.
Yeah, that is going to be required reading because we are for sure going to talk about this game.
Oh, yeah.
I imagine there's going to be a lot to say about it.
Yeah, probably.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And listeners, that's our show. This is a production of The Gauntlet. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we can be found on Twitter at GauntletRPG. That is both our community Twitter and my personal Twitter. It gets weird sometimes, but just deal with it. That's at GauntletRPG. We are on G+. Just go to the community section of G+, and search for The Gauntlet. You will find us there. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. Additionally, we are on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. All three of us, scintillating, sparkling personalities, can be found on the Gauntlet Slack. The Gauntlet Slack is a great place to be, and you can get access to it from the Patreon. I think that's all I've got to say. GauntletCon's coming up. Go check out GauntletCon as well. Lowell, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Agatha, thanks so much for being on the show.
And thank you.
And listeners, thanks for listening. Take care.